And we've talked about many men throughout the scriptures who would be considered mighty men. And when you think of three mighty men, you may not automatically come to these three. These may not be three that you would think of. But we're going to talk about them here that we read about in the Bible. And these mighty men, we may even consider them brave men. It might be another way to think about them. And these may not be some we think about. We may immediately think about men like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when we talk about three mighty men or three brave men. Or we may think of some men like Peter, James, and John when we talk about mighty or brave men. Or maybe Daniel, Noah, and Job. You couldn't find three better men in the scriptures than those three. But we're not talking about any of those. We're going to be considering somebody else. We're going to be considering three other men today. We're going to be discussing this morning Adino, Eleazar, and Shammah. Now, those may not be names you're real familiar with, and if you're not, that's okay. Most people probably wouldn't be. But these were three of David's mighty men. These were three of David's men, and these men were considered some of his mighty men. And in the Bible, we have recorded over in 2 Samuel chapter 23 that David had 37 mighty men. And we're talking about warriors here, talking about soldiers. He had 37 of them that were what we would consider elite soldiers. And these three were the best of the best. These three were the best that David had. Better than even these other 37 mighty men. Over in 2 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 8 it says, these are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Josheb-Basshebeth, the Tachmonite, chief among the captains. He was called Adino. There's the first one we'll talk about. Adino the Eznite, because he had killed 800 men at one time. That's pretty impressive. You've got a warrior, one man you can send out, and he can kill 800 men by himself. That's impressive. Verse 9, after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo the Ahahite, one of the three mighty men with David, when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there for battle, and the men of Israel had retreated. Now, kind of get this picture in your mind. They've come together for battle against the Philistines, and the rest of the soldiers run off. The rest of the Israelites retreated. The rest of the warriors did. He arose. Eleazar arose and attacked the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hand stuck to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to plunder. Eleazar went out himself when everybody else left, and he attacked the Philistines himself, and said he attacked them with the sword so long that his hand became weary and his hand stuck to the sword. You ever grabbed a hold of something so tight and so hard for so long, when you kind of let go of it, your hand just doesn't want to go back? I can imagine that's what was going on with Eleazar. But he just defeated them all by himself, because it says the people, the rest of those soldiers that had retreated, all they did was come back and plunder the people that Eleazar had killed. God had given them victory that day through Eleazar alone. And after him was Shammah, the son of Agee, the Hararite. The Philistines had gathered together into a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils. Then the people fled from the Philistines. So here we are again. They're about to go into battle against the Philistines, and they get their troop together, the Philistines do, at this field, and the Israelites see them, and they all run off. All the soldiers run off. But Shammah, he stationed himself in the middle of the field, defended it, and killed the Philistines, and the Lord brought about a great victory. By himself, he stood alone, and God gave him a great victory over these Philistines. These men had some victories that would rival those of Samson. Remember, probably the greatest victory that Samson had was he killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, if you leave out that last act of his when he pushed down the temple. But these men had victories similar to that, defeating whole troops of the Philistines by themselves, because God was with them. They bravely faced overwhelming odds in battle and were granted victory by God. These were brave men. When everybody else run off, these men stood brave, and they continued to fight. These were also men that loved and were very loyal to David, their king. David was their leader, and they were loyal to that leader, and they loved their leader, David. Listen to what they do next. In 2 Samuel 23, starting in verse 13. Then 3 of the 30 chief men, talking about these men we just mentioned, went down at harvest time and came to David at the cave of Adullam, and the troop of the Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephidim. So what we've got is they're about to go back into war again. And we have the Philistines there, and they've encamped, and David has set up his camp here at this cave. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. So evidently these Philistines have been able to take the city of Bethlehem. They had it under their control. And David said with longing, "Oh, that someone would give me a drink of the water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." Remember where David was from? He was from Bethlehem. And he's sitting there reminiscing, sitting there in that cave, thinking, boy, I sure wish I had a drink of water from home. Sure wish I had a little drink of water from home. It says in verse 16, so the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink it, but poured it out to the Lord. These 3 men, these 3 brave, mighty men, when they heard that David wanted a drink of water from Bethlehem, even though the Philistine army was there, they broke through the Philistine army, they went into the well, and they got him a drink of water, and they brought it back to him. David was so moved to this that he wouldn't even drink it. He would not even drink it. But he poured it out, it says, to the Lord, kind of as a sacrifice, as a drink offering to God. He says in verse 17, and he said, far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is this not the blood of the men who went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things were done by the 3 mighty men. He wasn't going to do it. He was so, I think, maybe humbled by the fact that these men would go and do that for him. Just when he said this, maybe just in passing, man, I wish I had something to drink from home. They loved him enough, were loyal enough to him that they took their lives in their hands and went and got that water for him. David really acts like here that he didn't deserve it. I think that's the idea. Now, the story of these men is being told and recorded near the end of David's life, but these events took place early in his reign, not too long after he became king. When the Philistines heard David had been made king, then they began to search for him in order to kill him. They thought this was probably a good time. Saul's dead, and now David is just now become king. It's probably an ideal time to go in there and kill another king and then to just take over all of Israel. So they began to look for him and kill him. David sets up his camp here with these soldiers at the cave, and while there, he no doubt begins to think about home. And he thinks about how good that water was at times in the past. No doubt as a young man, maybe out playing in the fields or out tending the sheep. And when he come back by that well and he get that water out there, just so cool, tasted so good. He began to reminisce about those things. A lot of times we remember things actually better than what they were. But he was reminiscing and desiring some of that good, cool water out of that well. We can relate to that, can't we? Get away from home for a little while. Maybe while you're away from home, you maybe start to miss some of Mama's cooking, or maybe some of Granny's pie, or whatever it is that you really liked. You begin to miss those things, feel a little homesick, and begin to kind of crave those things. And that's what David was doing. David mentions this desire for this water from home, and there's no doubt that this was heard by these 3 men, by Dino, Eliezer, and Shammah. They no doubt heard, or at least heard of, what David wanted. And they decided, because of their love for and their loyalty to their king, to risk their own lives for a drink of water. For a drink of water. to bring some of that water to their king. That's love. Now, these men are an extraordinary example for us today. They're an extraordinary example for us in several ways. So let's look at some lessons that we can learn from them. How can they be an example to us? Well, first off, they had a physical king then. We don't have a physical king now, but instead we have a spiritual king, and that's Christ. They served a physical king, we serve a spiritual one, and we need to serve that spiritual one similar to how they served their physical king. We need to have that same type bravery these men had when they served David. Brave men. These were brave men. We need to be brave. Paul tries to impress upon the Christians there at Corinth the need to be brave. He tells them there in 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 13, watch ye, stand fast in the faith, quit you like men, be strong. Now that's a verse you've heard me mention before, and I've got a wonderful example of it that I've mentioned before. But I guess maybe it hits home to me, and I hope it does for you too. But we see that he tells them here to stand fast in the faith, to stand fast in it. In other words, stand your ground. Don't be moved away from the truth. Be brave and stand your ground. Hold on to the truth tightly. Then he tells them to quit ye like men. Quit ye like men. They needed to act like a man. Now, I guess that may not be too politically correct today. Heard on the news this morning that some school, I think it was going to start treating masculinity like a mental disorder. But Paul tells these Christians they need to act like a man. What he meant by that was they needed to be brave. That's how the New King James Version translates that, quit ye like men, be brave. The Revised Standard Version says, be courageous. And Montgomery's New Testament says, be manly. Be brave. Don't be a coward, but be brave. We can't be a coward when it comes to serving God. We can't be cowardly. We need to be brave. We need to man up and do what God wants us to do. Revelation 21 verse 8 tells us, but the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Now, the cowardly there, that's not the one who's afraid of a fight. That's not the one who doesn't want to go to war. That's not the one that's being talked about. It's talking about the one who is afraid to obey God. Afraid to do what God wants. If we're a coward when it comes to obeying God, then we're not going to make it into heaven. That's what this verse teaches, if it doesn't teach anything else. Now, here's this example we talked about. We went to Muskogee a few years ago when Taylor got a little scholarship up there to play baseball, and we went to church that Sunday morning, a little congregation there, not too far from the campus. And the preacher actually talked about this verse while we were there that morning. And here's how he described it. He said it's kind of like a catcher in baseball. And maybe this is why it stuck with me all these years, because that's what Taylor had gone up there to do. He was a catcher. And he said it's like a catcher in baseball. It's the bottom of the last inning. The ball game's getting close to being over, and the other team has that tying run there on third base. It's right there, and we don't want to let that guy score. We don't want him to score. The ball's hit, the throw's made, and there's going to be a play at the plate. There's going to be a play right there at home plate. And anybody that's watched very much baseball knows sometimes those plays at home plate can get pretty rough. They can get pretty rough. What does the catcher do? What does he do? If he knows if he catches the ball and tries to tag the runner out, the runner's going to run over him. We've probably all seen that. That runner's got a head start, running start coming from third base. That catcher catches the ball and he lowers his shoulder and just tries to jar the ball loose. Never understood why they couldn't do that first, second, and third, but they could do it at home. a different story. But there have been some violent collisions. He knows he's going to get run over, and he knows it's going to hurt. Just a couple of pictures of what happens to those catchers. I mean, they really sometimes get plowed under. Just looks like it hurts. The catcher always seems to get the worst of that. It hurts. What's he going to do? He's seen all this before. It's not like the catcher's ignorant about what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen. May have even happened to him before. Is he going to chicken out? Is he going to be a coward? Is he going to miss the ball on purpose? Is he going to try to avoid the contact? What's he going to do? Or is he going to catch the ball, make the tag, and take the hit in order to win the game? What's he going to do? Well, to a real catcher, there's really no decision to be made there. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to make the tag. He's going to get run over, and it's going to hurt. But he's going to try to win the ball game. He's looking for that victory. As Christians, we're sometimes put into situations where obeying God may hurt. It might hurt. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to act like a man. We're going to quit you like men. We're going to be like that catcher and take that hit. What will we do? Friends may tease us because we don't use filthy language like they do. That might hurt a little bit, hurt our feelings. Or we're going to let something like that cause us to use foul language ourselves. We may not be able to get the job we want because it conflicts with worship services or with something else that would keep us from obeying God. Kind of hurts sometimes. Family and friends may turn their back on us because we're Christians. We love our family. We love our friends. And for them to turn on us because we're trying to do what's right, you think that doesn't hurt? It does. It does. They may be, we're thrown into prison for being a Christian. That's happening in some parts of the world today. Been going on since Christianity's been around, since the first century. Think that hurts? Well, sure it does. It's not pleasant to be thrown into prison. We may even be killed because we're Christians. That still goes on in the world. Still goes on in the world. Are we going to let the fact that some of these things may hurt cause us not to do what's right? Are we going to be a coward and chicken out, or are we going to catch that ball, take the hit, and win the game? What are we going to do? If we're faced with these situations, what are we going to do? Will we be brave, obey God, and take the hit in order to win the prize of heaven? Or are we going to be a coward? It takes some bravery to be a Christian. Those three mighty men of David, they were good examples of somebody who was brave. We need to be brave. Another lesson we may learn from these men is one of influence. One of influence. There's no doubt in my mind that these three, along with David, were godly men. They trusted in God. That's how they were able to gain those great victories. And since they were a part of this elite group of 37 men, there's no doubt that they spent a lot of time together. Spent a lot of time with these other brave men, these other servants of the king. You know, it makes it much easier to be godly and brave when we associate with people who are godly and brave. We spend all our time with people who are not willing to stand up for God. It's going to be hard on us. We need to associate with others who are willing to do whatever it takes to be pleasing to God. Others who are brave as well. Proverbs 27 and verse 17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend." Revised Standard Version on that verse says, "Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another." We can make each other better. We can make each other sharper. We can make each other better Christians by spending time together. But if those two pieces of iron, those two blades never come together, they're not going to sharpen each other. They have to be around one of each other. They have to come in contact. We can become better Christians when we associate with Christians. There's a principle there. These men were strong and brave, and they had the encouragement of other strong and brave men with the same goals. This is one of the main reasons it's so important for us to attend worship services, so we can be with other people who are interested in the same things we're interested in, so we can encourage one another and edify one another. We've got two wonderful opportunities here every week to spend time with others who love us and who love God. Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. Perfect opportunity to spend time with other Christians, with other godly and brave people who can help us be godly and braver. Iron sharpens iron. We need to be a good influence on one another, but in order for that to happen, we have to be around one another. Where could we be that be better for us spiritually than worshiping God with others who are interested in doing the very same thing? We need to try to be at worship services associating with other Christians at every opportunity that we can. Amen. Every chance we can. You know, if we don't like spending time with Christians in this life, probably not going to have to worry about it in the life to come. If you don't like being around Christians here, you wouldn't have to worry about being around Christians in eternity. Another lesson we can learn from these three is sometimes you do have to stand alone. It's good to have other Christians around us. It's good to have other godly people around us and brave people around us. But sometimes we have to make that stand alone. You look back at Oedino, we don't know too much about his battle other than he killed 800 men by himself. That's about all the scriptures tell us. He had to stand alone. But in standing alone, he killed 800 men. And then you look at Eliezer and Shammah, the stories we read about them, they continued to fight after the other soldiers ran away. Now, these were two different battles, and each one of these men had to stand alone in these battles because everybody else was gone. But they did, and God gave them the victory. Now, we may have to stand alone sometimes today. If we will, we need to rest assured that God will ultimately give us the victory. Reminds me of what happened to the Apostle Paul. You talk about somebody having to stand alone. As the book of Acts closes, Paul had been arrested and sent to Rome to stand before Caesar. He'd been arrested. He'd been sent up there to stand before the most powerful man on the face of the earth. And a ruthless man at that. Secular history indicates that Paul was released after appearing before Caesar, but was later rearrested a couple of years later and brought before Caesar one more time. He went up there the first time when he was there, as the book of Acts closes, and stood before Caesar and was released. Once he was released, though, he was out for a short period of time and rearrested and brought back. It was during this second imprisonment in Rome that he wrote 2 Timothy. One of the last books that we have the Apostle Paul writing. And it's, again, we talked about some of the last things you would say to somebody, what would it be? And we have there in 2 Timothy some of the last things that Paul said to this young man that he loved. But he describes his first appearance before Caesar there to Timothy. In 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 16, at my first defense, no one stood with me, but all forsook me. May it not be charged against him. Paul says, here I am before Caesar, before the emperor of the world, and I had to stand alone. None of my friends hung around. None of them stayed too close to check on me. But I had to stand alone. But listen to what he goes on and says. But the Lord stood with me. But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me so that the message might be preached fully through me and that all the Gentiles might hear. And I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion. I don't imagine what Paul told Caesar there on that first occasion, much different from what he told Felix, much different from what he told King Agrippa, not much different than what he told anybody else. I think he stood there before Caesar and preached the gospel of Christ. Isn't that what he says? That the message might be fully preached through me. He stood there that first time by himself and taught the truth. And it says, "Now I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion." I think that what that means is that he was released. Although at this point he's been thrown back in jail. Just like Paul, there may be times when we have to stand alone in doing what's right. There may not be anybody else with us, but you know what? We need to remember in those times that we're not truly alone, that God is with us. God knows what's going on, and God will give us the strength to do whatever is necessary in order to please Him. Whatever is necessary in order to follow His commands. There's never a time when we won't be able to do what God wants us to. The final lesson we'll look at from these brave men is their motivation. What motivated them? Why would they have acted like they did? I believe they were motivated out of love and loyalty to David, their king. Out of love and loyalty. David was the type of man that people loved. He was probably the best commander that they could have ever had. And other than maybe Uriah. Uriah may not have said that about him. But he was a good commander and he was a good king. You notice that David didn't command them to go get that water. He didn't tell these mighty men, says, "You go over there, you take your lives in your hand and you get me that water." That wasn't what happened. A wicked or an evil king might have done something like that, but that's not something David would have asked his men to do. They did this on their own. They went and got it because they wanted to please their king. They wanted to bring him a gift because they loved him. The love today should be our main motivation for obeying our king. We need to obey Christ because we love him. Some of that motivation probably initially should be because of fear of the punishment. But that should go away, and our motivation should be more because we love God. We love him because what all he has done for us, and we want to please our king just like these men did. 1 John chapter 5 verse 3 says, "For this is the love of God." If you want to know what the love of God is, if you want to know if we love God, this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. Now that says a lot. We're not just going out here and doing what God told us to do and doing it begrudgingly and just because we have to. We're doing it because we want to. His commandments are not a burden, even though some of them may hurt. They're not burdensome. We want to obey God. We want to do for him. If we love God, then we're going to obey him because we want to please him. We want to please Christ our King. Listen to what Jesus says about love and obedience and how closely tied together they are. John 14 and verse 23, Jesus answered and said to him, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him." What a wonderful thought that is, to know that if we love God, that we will have a relationship with God, that he is aware of us, that he sent his son into this world to die for our sins, and that he cares for us. He knows the things that we are going through, and this idea that we're going to come to him and make our home with him, almost like a family relationship, and it's described as a family relationship in the Bible. We are his children. What a wonderful thing that is, that the creator of the universe feels that way about us if we love him and keep his commandments. But he goes on in verse 24, "He who does not love me does not keep my words. And the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me." Well, if we don't love God, then we're not going to obey. So it's real easy to tell if we love our King. It's easy to tell if we love our King. All we have to do is look at the things we do. Look at what we do. If we're obeying him, we love him. If we don't obey him, we don't. It's just that simple. We can claim to love God all day long. We can tell everybody how much we love him, proclaim it all around the world. But if we don't obey him, we're just a liar. Although these men may not be as well known as some of the others we mentioned, there's still some great lessons we can learn from what little bit we do know about them. Some wonderful lessons. As Christians, we need to be brave. We need to be brave. Now, a lot of times you think about the Christian that they're meek and they're gentle and they're kind, but that doesn't mean they're cowards. We have to be brave and obey God. We need to associate with other Christians and allow them to be a positive influence in our lives. Associate with other children of God. And sometimes we will be the only ones around that's doing what's right. We'll be the only ones. And also we need to love our King and we need to obey him. That's just so simple. Let's love God and keep his commandments. Let's just do what God has required of us. Well, that's the conclusion of the lesson this morning. If we have anyone here this morning who is subject to the gospel call, we're going to ask you at this time to come